Have you ever been called a band geek, a theater nerd, cyber dork, studio rat, gamer punk, orchestra dork, book monkey, drama jock, Poindexter, artsy fartsy, or just plain weird? Well then, welcome to Art Nerds. This is the podcast where we sit down with our nerdy friends, embrace our inner geek, and celebrate our art. And welcome back, my friends. This is Art Nerds. This is the place where we talk to our nerdy friends about their artwork. My name is Mike O'Brien, and today, with me via the internet, I have a young lady named Kathryn Patricia Cobbler. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing well. How are you, Mike?
I'm doing quite well today. Doing quite well. I've been anxious to talk to you about your artwork ever since we met. My friend Carmen Leszewski-Custer recommended you and talks very highly of you, and I've been listening to your stuff on your website. So, Kathryn, what is your art?
Thanks so much, Mike. So I often, when I meet people, and you know, whether that's at a friend's party or if I'm at a concert, I'll often introduce myself as a loop pedal violist. And basically, the reason why I really kind of categorize myself that way is that it takes up a big part of my practice. So I use what's called a loop pedal, and it's a device that kind of acts like a recording device, if you will. So I have a few pedals on it, and so once I press one pedal as I play, it starts recording, and then when I press it again, it starts to record that loop over and over. And so a big part of my performing journey and my journey as a composer has involved using solo viola and loop pedal. So that's why it's often in my introduction when I introduce myself to people.
Is using the loop pedal as you said you're a violinist or violist?
Violist, yes.
Violist. Okay, there is a difference.
Mm-hmm.
But using the loop pedal as a violist, is that unusual?
Well, in terms of unusual, I would say in Canada, I can count on one hand how many there are of us. My hope. So I guess you can kind of get a sense of it is very much a niche thing. But I would say my hope is that it continues to grow in exploration. And that's kind of when I think about my vocation as a composer. So I am a composer, and I've recorded a lot of EPs, short EPs for solo viola and loop pedal. I've also started to produce some sheet music. And so my hope is that it becomes an area of exploration, not just for violists, but for bowed string players in general. I think that it's very common among guitarists, but for bowed string instruments, it is a little bit of uncharted territory, if you will. Something that I really enjoy about it is that I feel like it's led that the loop pedal itself is really the thing that has infused my life as a composer and my life as an improviser as well.
Interesting. How did you come about loop pedal, or what led you to start using it? Let me start there.
Oh, that is a good question. And this actually is a story that I don't tell very often, but here we go. So I used to work for a social music program, and such an amazing program teaching kids in underserved communities. And a friend of mine who is a violinist and a violist who used a looper, and she used to tour with different bands. So she'd used it quite often. And I was kind of in a bit of a rut in my artistic practice. I was classically trained and I had done the orchestra thing. I'd done a bit of chamber stuff, but I really was kind of not sure where to go next. I think I was kind of feeling the fatigue of going from gig to gig to gig. And I mean, amazing gigs, and I was happy to have them, but I think I was lacking in feeling my artistic voice, if you will. So I was kind of in a place where I was ready for something new. And then, you know, it was just during a staff meeting where she was like, hey, like I have this old loop pedal. I don't know, it still works. Like, do you know anyone who would be interested in it? And I was like, well, sure. Like I would love to try it out. And so it literally was just kind of on a whim. Something that I don't recommend doing per se, but because I was really just in a space where I really wanted to try something new, I thought, you know what, I'm going to dive into this. And I actually booked a gig for myself before I even knew how to use it, which in hindsight was that, you know, the best thing to do. It was like a low key, it was for Canada Day, and it was going to be mostly background music where people could stop and listen. But I thought, you know what, that's a safe space for me to be a try this out.
Right. Sounds low pressure enough to.
Yeah.
But nothing motivates like an audience.
Yeah, no kidding.
Or a deadline.
Yeah. And you know what? It is I mean, sometimes I think in hindsight, should I have done that? But you know what? It really forced me to get comfortable with it. And leading up, because I only had a month, to be honest, before the gig. So I was using the loop pedal 2 to 3 hours a day, just trying to, because I was making arrangements of Canadian folk music and I was using the looper. So I was both arranging and learning how to play with it. Hey. And so,
Right.
so it really helped me to just kind of dive in feet first.
Yeah, nothing, I'm going to say 1 month masterclass in it, self-taught masterclass, what it sounds like.
Yeah, it definitely was.
So how was the gig? How was Canada Day then? Did
It was,
with the looper for the first time?
You know what? I think it felt strange because it was new, but there was something at the same time that just felt really energizing about it. When I think about ensemble playing and the type of ensemble playing I really enjoy, I mean, I think in terms of orchestra, there are some orchestral works that I love and would love to play again. But chamber music is really where my heart is. I feel like it's just such an intimate art form. And I find loop pedal is like the closest thing to doing that on your own, because you're basically turning yourself into a string quartet. And so I very much enjoyed exploring with the different layers of sound. And when I use the looper, I actually do treat it that way. I treat each new voice as its own entity and try to interact with it as I hear it in real time.
That sounds fascinating. I mean, in terms of process, listening to what you've just done, and part of the looper is that it will repeat
Exactly,
whatever you've played until you tell it to stop, I'm assuming.
Yes, yeah.
But listening to yourself and knowing that initial, how you call it, voice, and then reacting to your own voice. I mean, you know it's there, you know what's coming, but then forcing yourself, or I don't know, maybe not forcing yourself, to interact in a different voice, I think is the best word to put it. It sounds fascinating. It sounds hard.
Well, when you think about it, when we train as musicians, we're always looking at taking on different characters, like what is the music showing us? And I often find that even if it's the same kind of theme, that trying to give each musical voice its own character, if that makes sense. So it's just kind of, And so I find it's the same tools that we use when we're playing, one voice that's part of a larger ensemble, or if we're doing a solo work, but it's just kind of, I find it a bit more multifaceted, if you will.
Yeah. No, I come from the world of theater.
Oh, right. Yeah.
I teach theater. Yeah. So I teach theater and, acting, directing, all that stuff. So when you use the terms voices and improv and the character work, it rings very, very true to me. So suddenly it doesn't sound so hard. And it's in the sense that, yes, I can play one character, but playing a different character off of myself might be fun.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I find that I find that it inspires play, if that makes sense. And as a classically trained musician, I find that really life-giving. Oftentimes, particularly when I was finishing up my master's degree, there was a lot of emphasis on, you want to have musical and artistic integrity, and you want to play exactly what's on the page, and you want to honor the original voice of that composer while also bringing in your own artistry. But there is a high technical approach to that type of playing. With the looper, I hope to bring the same type of virtuosity, but I feel like because you are responding in real time, there is something that's a bit more live to it. And I find that it's just been a really freeing part of my practice as a musician.
Yeah, I can see that. I can, in the sense that in my field, I make a distinction. I don't know if this is true or not. This is strictly me. I make a distinction between an actor and a performer. An actor being a person who takes somebody else's work, somebody else's lines, somebody else's intentions, and does their best to bring it to life via their own instrument, their body, their voice, their own personality, their own experiences. But a performer is freed in a sense that they're not working with somebody else's original work, unless it's their own. Does that make sense? Like Robin Williams was an actor. He could turn, he could use somebody else's words and make a beautiful character, but then he could turn around and then be on the stage by himself, making it up as he goes as a performer and be equally successful. So that's what it sounds like to me. And your process is that you get to be both in this kind of process. I mean, there's a technical virtuosity versus just an improvisational, you said?
Yeah.
I'm just, like I said, I'm just trying to wrap my head around it, but it sounds magnificent. The process sounds fantastic.
Oh, thank you. And so a big part of my practice is live improvisation. I find when I get to do that with, whether it's by myself or with colleagues, I find that it's just such it's both intimate, but it's also something that's very energizing. If I were to compare improvisation to a pre-composed work is, it's almost like you say, it's that actor side of things. You know, you already know what you're going to say before you step on stage. Whereas when you're improvising, it's more or less like it's a conversation with a friend. You know, someone says something, someone responds, and you kind of feed off each other as you go through the conversation. And it's almost like what we're doing here, you and I. You know, we're chatting and we're talking and we're feeding off of one another. But at the end of the day, we know that, you know, as it being a podcast, that there are people who are going to be witness to this conversation. And so I find it very conversational improvisation.
That's interesting, finding the audience with it as well. I mean, I'm thinking in terms of your music, and because, like I said, I was listening to some of it earlier, and since we set this up, I've been listening to it off and on. But I love the idea of the improvisation. Do you prefer improvisational work over, say, like strict orchestral stuff or chamber work? Do you have a preference?
That's a really hard question. That's a really hard question.
Big sigh.
Yeah, because, you know, it's so funny because there are just some works that I hear them and I think, you know, I know it's a voice that could not come from myself, but it's just so compelling. You know, they're like the solo works of Bach, I just find are just so compelling. And I don't know if it's actually my writing style to create something like that, but it is something that I long to express, and I'm so happy that I'm able to. But at the same time, I feel like improvisation, it pushes me in my artistry in a different way, particularly when I'm improvising with other people. Something that a question that I like to ask when I enter a stage or a performance is, what do we need right now? And the reason that I like to ask that, I'm asking that for myself, but also for the audience, and knowing that this experience is something that's unique to everyone who's present and will never be replicated again. And I think to an extent, you can get the same experience when you have pre-composed music, for sure. When you really engage in the artistry of a work and you bring yourself to that piece of music. But I find with live improvisation, when you really are asking that question, you're allowing yourself to make decisions in the moment. And that's the thing I find as an improviser, is that in order for me to continue to grow, I mean, because I've improvised so many times, I know there are things that I could play, you know, that sound nice, but I often try to force myself to say, well, what needs to come out in this moment? And that could be a beautiful sound. It could be a not so beautiful sound, and actually holding space for all of those things.
Right. Yeah. Everything you say rings true in my mind as a performer, in the sense that, do you prefer solo improv with the loop pedal, or do you prefer improv with a group? Or
I would say, and maybe it's the extrovert in me, whenever I get the opportunity to improvise with an ensemble, I love it. It's one of my favorite things in the world. And I think one of the reasons why I do love it so much is that you get to witness someone else's musical language. Because I do think that it's almost, I think of improvisation, it's almost like when you go to the cottage and you run the water for the first time of the season, it kind of comes out a little green and, you know, something that you don't want to drink. Right? And then you keep running the water, and then it finally becomes clear. And that's how I would describe the experience for someone improvising for the first time. You know, you're finding your feet. You might not like what comes out, but you keep going. And then you start to craft a musical language. It's always different because your audience is always different. Your setting's always going to be different, and you yourself will change and evolve. But there is, I do believe that we all kind of have this musical language, if you will, that compiles our experience as artists, our own sense of virtuosity and our own style. And so when and so when I get the opportunity to improvise with the live group, I find that I'm inspired by my colleagues and their own musical voice and identity. And that's why I love it so much.
Yeah, that's exciting. So, so is that your preference, or
I would say so?
On the day?
I would say that's my preference. I do think that I learn things about my own self when I improvise with the looper. One thing I like to say that was kind of one of my raison d'etres, if you will, about becoming kind of a loop pedal violist was one thing I wanted to do and hope that I do in my work as a performer and composer is that I'm honoring the solo voice as the viola. And so, you know, if you were to type in solo viola into Google, your computer might blow up with like viola jokes because it's not something that the viola is known for in terms of, you know, being a solo instrument. And I think in terms of science and the development of the instrument, before it was kind of this projection issue that because of the actual dimensions of the instrument, certain ranges of the instrument had a hard time projecting in orchestral or thicker textures. Now with modern makers and technology, I think they've gotten around a lot of those things, but the viola still doesn't have the same identity as a solo instrument as the violin or the cello does. And something that I love about the viola is that there's this middle range that has these beautiful colors in it. And I find when you amplify the instrument, you don't have to work so hard. Those colors just really shine through. And when I play with the looper, yeah, you can really hear those colors in a new and different way. And so I think that's kind of another reason why I like to improvise with the looper. But if I had to choose between the two, I love being able to collaborate with others.
Right. Now, you said you write your own. I mean, well, obviously there's a ton of stuff on your website. Do you write? Now, is the looper part of your writing process, or is your improvisation with either solo or with ensembles part of the writing process for you?
Yeah, most definitely. I think I only have one work published without the looper, and that's a piece that I wrote for solo violin and spoken word. So there's a poem that goes throughout, and that's called
interesting.
That's called A Home Called Wander. And a wonderful violist in Boston was able to premiere that piece. And so that's the one that I have that's not for looper, that's published at the moment. The other pieces for looper, I don't know, I kind of have two approaches. Sometimes a piece of music will just come out whole, and I'll kind of get this sense of, you know what, I need to book a recording session. There's something inside that needs to come out. And sometimes it'll just come out whole. And I'm like, okay, there it was. And then there are some times when I'll be, you know, going throughout my day and I'll get a melody stuck in my head. And I don't know if this is good or not. A lot of people will say, if you have something, you should record it right away. I often don't. I often see if it comes back. And I find if the melody continues to persist, then I think, okay, this is something that needs to be heard. This is a voice that needs to come out. And then I'll start to play with it a little bit. And I might turn on my looper and just kind of play with the melody that I'm hearing and see what accompanies it. So I kind of have two different types of processes, if you will.
Okay. So in that second scenario you just outlined, where do these tunes come from? Are they accidents, or deep seated from your soul, cracking through somehow?
I don't know. Maybe the latter. I think it's so interesting because as sometimes you think about, you know, how you are as children and how that affects what we do as adults. And it's funny when I look back at myself as a young child, like if you were to ask me, you know, as a teenager or in university, if I ever thought about composing, I would have been like, no way. Like that was something that was just foreign to me. But actually as a young child, I used to hear music all the time. Like I used to think up music in my head all the time. And it was only after I started to compose that I actually remembered those moments. So honestly, the melodies, they'll just come when I'm washing the dishes. It can be sometimes when I'm practicing, but they'll come at any time, if that makes sense.
That's marvelous. I wish I'm envious, quite frankly, of anything that comes just plops out of my. Why the viola of all instruments? I mean, you've already touched on it a little bit, and I have to ask, why that instrument versus something else?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there's a bit of a story that goes along with this one. And so I actually started on the violin, as many violists do. The rule in my house was everyone needed to play an instrument. And so before the violin, I actually started on the piano, but my 5-year-old brain couldn't process, doing one thing with one hand and then doing one with another thing with the other. So I kind of threw a bit of a hissy fit, if you will. And my dad said, do you want to play the violin? And I didn't even know what a violin was, but I thought, you know what, let's go for it. Let's try it. And I continued on actually until halfway through my undergrad degree. And I had gone out to Colorado with some of my friends from school. We were doing a music program. And I was at a concert in Colorado, and there was a string quartet called the Tekka String Quartet performing. And at the time, the violist, who's the violist in the ensemble, her name was Geraldine Walther, or Jerry, and she was also the principal violist of the LA Phil at the time. And I remember there was it was a Benjamin Britten piece they were playing, and there was just a viola solo that just came out, and oh my goodness, I just felt so compelled by it. And then after the concert, I went up to her and I just said, oh my goodness, I love the concert and I love your sound. She is the most beautiful sound. And then she just looked at me and said, well, maybe you'll play the viola one day. And the next summer, I went to that camp and I had decided to switch to the viola. It was a hard decision because there was a viola professor who was at my university who had left and who was coming back, and who I really wanted to study viola with her. But it was kind of this weird serendipitous moment that the next summer, that same time, that I had chosen to switch. And so the rest of my degree from my undergrad, I finished on viola and then went on to do a master's in viola performance, so on the viola as well.
So it wasn't it's just a gut reaction to the sound.
Yeah.
Essentially.
And
to boil it down a little bit.
It was. And you know what? It's kind of funny because I almost feel like it was a sound that was kind of chasing me. This sounds kind of weird, but I feel like it was a sound that was chasing me my whole life. My teacher growing up, who I studied with for probably 8 to 10 years, was actually the principal violist of the Windsor Symphony where I grew up. And my goodness, the most amazing sound. And so I had grown up with hearing this sound, but it wasn't until that moment where I felt like it was time to fully switch. And so, yeah, I think it was a bit of a journey, but that was kind of the breaking point, if you will.
Interesting that it just kind of sitting there in the background all this time.
Yeah.
Interesting, very interesting. I'm stunned by your process. I mean, you're trying to describe it to me, and stunned in the right way. Let me say that. I'm not. What? No. I'm absolutely enthralled by hearing you talk about your process. I think what I'm curious to know is this all entirely your process? I got so many questions. I'm sorry if I stutter.
No, that's okay. This is great.
And again, bringing this technology, this looping technology to this ancient instrument, and again, your process on it, is it something that you have invented for yourself? I mean, yeah, like you said, the looper's been applied to probably almost every instrument or melodic instrument. But for you, is this just your process, your journey, or have you collected bits and pieces from other people in terms of doing this, or how did you come up with a lot of this, or is it just experience?
That's a really good question. I mean, I think that like we all are kind of the products of our community and our surroundings. And I feel really privileged to be able to have worked with so many amazing musicians. And I hope that I've gleaned things from that. And I think particularly in the area of improvisation, I've had so many amazing colleagues that I've been able to perform with it and to play off of. In terms of my style of composing for the loop pedal, that was something that that was kind of my own journey. It wasn't something that I had sought training from someone else. And the way I kind of had treated for composing and performing for the loop pedal with viola was I told myself, okay, I'm just going to practice in front of people. And it did take a long time to get the courage. I had one show, it was actually like a kids concert that I had composed music for. And I thought, it's a kids concert. This will be a good, easy, soft way of kind of getting into things. And then I had finally gotten to the point, a friend of mine who had a recording studio where I was going to record, my first set of pieces. But then after that, as I continued to especially particularly during that pandemic, I wanted to continue to record, and I treated that process as, okay, you know what? I may not love 100%, this might not be the best work that I ever do, but I'm actually just going to keep doing it and hope that I grow from that journey. And so it's so funny as I go back and listen to my earlier EPs, it's so I still love many of those melodies, but it's so interesting to hear the trajectory and how some things have stayed the same and some things have evolved. And I feel like there are some cyclical things in my composing practice as well. But it really was this idea of, I'm going to practice in front of people and I'm just going to release my music to whoever would like to listen and showcase my journey that way.
You're a brave soul, quite frankly. I'm going to learn this in public.
Yes.
Yeah, most of us actors wouldn't do that. So I think that, first of all, it's admirable, but it's also interesting that if you want to learn something, do it for somebody else.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a teacher, so if I don't know what I have to teach, I learn fast.
Right. Yeah.
What I got to teach. So it sounds like the same kind of thing, but you're forcing yourself to do it, which I think is the cool part.
Yeah, and I think
it's the very cool part.
Oh, thank you. And I think that has always really served me well as a musician, is that I find, and maybe other people find this too, it's like you always, when you've got a gig on the books, you always practice harder, right? If you don't have anything for months, then you still want to practice for your own self and development. But the same thing with, being able to play with the looper with my viola, I just knew that if I had, set out to do this, that I had told people about it, that gave myself some outside accountability. And it also,
okay. Yeah.
And it helped me to not be too precious with my work, if you will. I always want to be able to put out things that I'm proud of and, that I'm happy and proud to share with other people. But it also helped, I find, and I'm not sure if this is a classical musician thing or just people who have this kind of zeroed in mindset, but I feel like it's so easy to pick at things and to say, well, I want to do this and I want to do this and I want to do that. And then 3 weeks later, and then the music's still not released. Whereas I find for myself, the thing that I've done is I've given myself a certain amount of time. I used to give myself a month to put out an EP. And then when that time came, it was like, okay, it's time to release the music. And I found that very freeing, because I feel like it helped me to get more comfortable with my sound and just to trust myself a bit more.
Yeah, I was going to say, it sounds like it forces you to trust what you're doing a little bit. That's also an interesting idea in the sense that, you're not so rigid with what you're doing.
Yeah.
There's no such thing as perfect.
Mm-hmm.
But I think I also am astounded by you, because your confidence level with your instrument has never come into play in terms of this conversation. So you know what you're doing, but you can have the confidence to put out, it's not the best thing, but it's nice enough. A lot of us can't do that, which I think is interesting, which I think is lovely, quite frankly.
Well, I'm glad you see it as confidence. I don't know if I always feel that way. I think it, when I'm on the other side, I used to be so afraid of the red button, when I would press my recorder and maybe it's a different button for other people. But for me, it's like it goes red, and I would have like a freeze moment. And I think being able to just force myself to record has really gotten me past that. And I think that when we think about deciding if something is ready to go out and record, I think we always want to put out things that we're proud of. But at the same time, we also want to think at the end of the day, what is the goal and the objective? And I had a viola teacher, Rennie Regier, an amazing violist in my master's degree. And he used to say to us, every time you put this instrument up to play, you have to figure out how to make the world a better place. And I think about that in my own art in terms of, if my music truly is a gift, then that's the focus. It's not on me and my own insecurities. It's about what am I giving to the people who are listening? And I find if that's the focus, it's much easier to be able to go through the process.
That's beautiful. Beautifully stated.
Oh.
Yeah, my wife is she teaches music and art to K through third.
Oh, so fun.
She paints and but she describes it in the same sort of way, is that all of her original artwork, somewhere there's a story that she's trying to tell.
Yes, yeah.
And it sounds like you're saying the same kind of thing. Yes, I can be a solo artist. Yes, I can be a solo composer. But ultimately, an artist needs an audience. And I think what you just said, you're basically embracing your audience as part of the process.
Yes.
Which I think is vital to, especially as performing artists,
Oh, I love how you said that. And I think that is something that is missing in a lot of artistic practices today, embracing the audience as part of the process, turning that I to a we, and having that co-collaboration. Because, when we think about it, we were all at home for many months, and now we've kind of seen a resurgence of live music and going to art galleries and different arts events. I think that, at least for me, I found that the pandemic gave me time to be much more retrospective about how I spend my time and also how I want to make an impact. And so when we think about bringing our art form to the table, whether that's a concert, whether that's a visual art piece or theater, what are we inviting people to leave their houses for? Is it for me to show off what I can do? Or are we inviting them to an experience that will be transformative? And
absolutely.
Yeah.
I think you just said it right there. I think now going back to your improvisational performances, how much of that audience interaction is part of what happens through the viola?
I love that question. And to be honest, it depends on how brave I am in the moment and how brave I suspect my audience is. I oftentimes, when I describe my performances, I like to think of them as interactive. And that can change depending on the setting. I do a lot of work in terms of doing concerts in school, so that is a little bit easier. I find that there are a lot of kids and students that are much more, willing to be interactive. But I've also been known, in concerts for different concert series to invite the audience to co-create with me. And with the looper, it's kind of interesting. I can do that where I'll play a melody. I'll play two different melodies, and then I'll get the audience to choose. I'll get them to clap along and to do rhythms. I've even invited the audience to sing with me, which has been beautiful. Like, those are the moments where I just love that co-collaboration. So I think in terms of the improvisation and the collaboration, it all depends on how brave I feel, and also, how I feel like it's going to be received also too.
Well, just how brave. I mean, if you're inviting people to sing with you on a, just, hey, come on up. That's okay. You're brave beyond words. But I think, but I like that you're so trusting that your audience is walking with you on this journey. And it sounds like you've been very successful to do that. If those are the results you're getting.
Oh, thank you. And it's so interesting because I don't know if we talk enough about trust in the arts. Because to be a performer, there is so much trust needed, trust. And I think that's part of it in terms of being willing to get to the point where you can press record, when you can press that release button, when you can book that next concert. It really isn't in most cases. I mean, there are some cases that's like, well, if you feel unprepared or if you haven't learned something, then perhaps, you need to take more time in the practice room or learning your lines or what have you, depending on your art form. But at the end of the day, if we've done the work where we feel proud of our art form, the biggest barrier is trust. And if we can get past that and to be able to say that I trust myself in the moment, that I have something to say, that I have a gift to bring to the audience, that I feel comfortable even inviting them into that so they can also feel that transformation as well. I feel like that's something that, I hope will be talked about more in university degree programs and in upcoming artists, is this idea of trust in oneself, but also trust in this process of creation.
Oh, I'm going to start adding that to my classes. The idea of, because I teach, like I said, I teach theater.
Yeah.
But not only just trusting yourself and your own abilities, but trusting the audience to, I think the audience, and let me see if you agree with this. In my experience, as hard as I am on myself to do something, the audience is generally there and are very forgiving and are, they want a good experience. So they're willing to allow you to be, I won't say sloppy, that's not the right word, but they're willing to forgive, even if I mess up a line, if I can get past it and keep working, they'll forgive that as long as the story is still being told. Does that make sense to you? And would you agree with that? Or
100%. I think part of, and maybe this is something that, we need to see more of, is that when we talk about artistic integrity in bringing, our best performance, our best selves to the role that we're playing or the performance that we're doing, I think at the same time, we need to pair that with vulnerability. We need to be vulnerable enough to say that at the end of the day, like, especially I find with classically trained musicians, we have to remind ourselves that we are not robots. And that people don't expect us to do that. And I often, and this is the funny thing, and I don't know if you find this in your practice as well, but for me, it's like, if there's a note that like it's slightly out of tune, it's like you feel like that note was sounding for a whole 5 minutes, whereas literally it was half a second. And I think that, like you say, that if we can come back strong from that, now I always hope to say, okay, well, why did that happen? And try to get curious about why that happened on stage if it didn't happen in the practice room, and to be able to go through that process. But like you say, they want, I think, especially in this time more than ever, we want authentic and vulnerable performances. We do not want perfection.
Right. I think, I especially that moment, that one tiny half a note that's off somewhere. It's such a nanosecond in the world, and we'll obsess over it.
Yeah.
The artists that we are. But the audience, they're not there. That's not why they're there. They're not there to catch mistakes.
Yeah.
And it's the idea that they are there. And I think we are there as performers too, to enjoy that company of each other, of the artist, of the performer and the audience.
Yeah.
The audience is there to be part of something magnificent, and we're there to be part of something magnificent. And it doesn't matter who's doing what part, but as long as, we all kind of meet in that little tiny space of time and light and energy,
Oh, I love
that's
that.
the whole point, I think.
Yeah. Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
And, sorry.
Yeah, it's interesting. No, I'm going to say it's interesting because I'm talking to a lot of artists, especially ones with, a lot of live audience, even in painters and fine artists, and everybody talks about the audience kind of the same way. As long as there's some way we meet in the middle and there's that tiny little dot of, existence where we can be there together and enjoy it. That's kind of the whole thing.
Yes. Yeah.
For everybody.
And that's the other thing. I think along with trust, the thing that we need more of, it's like, well, how do we silence the ego? Because in the moment when I am thinking about that one note and I'm like, oh, I didn't land that shift exactly how I wanted. I'm no longer thinking about the audience. I'm thinking about me, and, my teacher who I studied with in my master's, he used to say that, playing the viola it's a lot like flying a plane. And it's like you're thinking about all the things that you have to do, but you're not thinking about yourself. You're not thinking about the ego. You're looking at, well, what is the gift that I'm bringing in this moment? And we're staying present in that. And so I think both trust, being able to stay present, and just being able to kind of let go of ourselves a little bit in that ego and being present for that. And that can really help us to focus on that we that you were referring to.
Yeah. I think that goes back to the idea of being a performer versus an actor. A performer allows themselves to be loose and, it's especially with, again, back to improv. If you don't have anything specifically in mind, it's all going to be great. It all has the potential to be brilliant. So anyway, I love your attitude, and I love that idea of trust and presence and making sure the audience has what they want, or giving them what they want.
Yeah. That's
beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. I could end it there, but I'm not going to. You have, I'm going to kind of shift the direction a little bit. You have a very unique, at least in terms of the recordings that I've heard.
Okay.
And I guaranteed I haven't heard all of them on your website, but I've sat through a great number of them. But there's always how would you describe your style? You can't pigeonhole you. I'll give you that.
Yeah. And you know what? That has been the hardest question for me to answer. And if I'm completely honest, I think I'm waiting for someone to tell me what it is. Because I don't know if it really fits in one box. I think, some people say, oh, is it ambient? And I think, oh yeah, there's definitely notes of that. But then I'm also I love the music of Brahms, and I love romantic and 20th century music. And so, sometimes I try to mimic that in my style as well. So I don't know if I know the answer to that.
That might be the best answer. However,
okay.
If you don't have, this is just me being a, artsy fartsy old man. Do you need a style? Because I listen to it, and like I said, I can't pinpoint a specific influence, but I can hear millions of influences.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And some of them sound like movie landscapes. Mm-hmm. Some of them sound just like emotional, just kind of musings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Does this make sense? But to say it's jazz or something else, or
yeah, no, that
what have you?
That really resonates with me, because oftentimes, if it doesn't come out whole, and even when it does, I often feel like the title of the piece or the suite that I'm writing comes quite quickly, because it is kind of based off of, a scene, almost like you would have in a movie, or it's based off of a certain emotion. And so I think that's why you might be feeling some of that. So that definitely resonates with me.
Right. But I was just curious to know if you worked from a specific style. But I think your answer is much more satisfying than knowing.
Yeah. And, I don't think I do. And I'm hoping that as I continue, to practice in front of people and to be able to share my own artistic journey, I know that my style will change and evolve. And it is tricky, because I think that that's something that we often do think of as performers and composers. If you are in a certain style or in a box, people know what to expect from you. if you play music that has more of a jazz feel, they'll be like, okay, I know what to expect from this person, and you might attract certain people because of that kind of identity. But because I'm not really sure where I fit, I think it is kind of a catch-all sometimes. So
it is interesting, yeah. Yeah, because I mean, like even some of them sound just so very stream of conscience,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
which I enjoy.
Aw, thank you.
Everything I've heard so far. So, yeah, just curious to know if it came from anywhere special, or if are you inventing your own style?
Well, I might be. Who knows? Who knows? I think that in my work as a performer, as a composer, and as an educator, as I do those interactive concerts in schools, one thing a teaching artist and someone who's really big in kind of the teaching artist field, Eric Booth, he would talk about, art is making things that you care about. And I hope that I can be a catalyst for that in many ways. And some of those emotional musing, something that I love when I do a concert is when people come up to me and they're like, when I was playing this piece, I was thinking of this memory, I was thinking of this image. And oftentimes it's very different depending on the person. And I hope to be able to encourage that in people, that they have their kind of their own, that my music serves as a catalyst for their own creativity and imagination, if you will.
Again, going back to inviting the audience into your improv,
Mm-hmm.
and just, letting them be part of it. That's, we can't get out of that theme for some reason. So, okay. First of all, you're enchanting. This whole interview has been just lovely, and lovely to meet you. I've got a few more questions, kind of my end of the interview, James Lipton kind of stuff.
Okay.
Number one, what is it about your art that turns you on?
It's gonna sound very simple and maybe cheesy, but I just love the sound of the viola. Like I think it's just such a beautiful sound, and I feel like it's underrated compared to the other string instruments. I know everyone's in love with the cello, but I love the sound of the viola and the different colors that you can find. So I think that's something that I continue to be inspired by.
Do you dare want to try to describe the difference between a viola and a cello and or violin, or just want to leave it at that? Or is that for another podcast?
It might be for another podcast. If I could sum it up simply, I feel like this might sound a bit cheesy, but I feel like the viola is always considered the middle voice or the inner voice. And so I often feel like composers will use it when they're wanting to express something that is a little bit more sorrowful, or perhaps a little bit more that has a really strong and vast character palette. And so I think that's one of the strengths of the instrument. I also think that because it's such a mellow sound, it's very inviting to people.
Interesting.
With the viola and the cello, they're big. Well, the cello is a bigger instrument, so it has a lower sound, which is beautiful, and a really strong production, but it's a very present sound. And I would say the same about the violin. And you can have presence with the viola, but it's one of those things where I just feel like the solemnness and the mellow color palette of the instrument is very inviting. And so I think that's where I really enjoy it, and kind of think that it's a bit different from the other instruments in the string family.
Interesting. I love how you describe your music using terms from every known art form. This color and emotion and a character. Love that. What about your art turns you off?
Oh, my art turns me off. That's a good question. You know what? I think there are some days where I might be playing with my viola and my looper where I'm kind of like, I don't know if I like this. But you know what? I choose to record it anyways. And actually, I keep a sound journal. And so I'm always recording music, even if I don't decide to put it out. And so there are days when I feel like the thing that the instrument wants to say might not be the thing that I want to say, but I continue to trust the process. And then, the next session, then we see how it goes. So I think that's kind of what might turn me off, if that makes sense.
Is it a turn off or more of just a frustration?
Maybe a frustration, actually. Maybe a frustration.
That's fair. That's fair. Is there any other art form that you have not tried that you think you might like to?
I don't know if it's one that I will ever do. Something that I love, I've done in collaborations, is I love collaborating with dancers, and that's an art form. Myself, I'm not a dancer, and I think that could be interesting to try. That, though, I don't know if I have like the vulnerability to do that. But but in another lifetime, perhaps that is something that I would want to try.
Is there any art form that you would never want to try?
Oh. I don't know if I would want to be a bagpiper. I have a lot of respect for the bagpipes, but I think that's one that I'll leave to the professionals. So.
Why on earth not?
It's
just out of curiosity.
There's a lot of lung power that goes into that. And you know what? I feel like the bagpipes, they can be quite beautiful. But I think that there's something about it that, I don't know, might not resonate with me as much. So I think I'll leave that to those who dabble.
You're talking about these lovely human sounds coming out of a viola. I can imagine a bagpipe, not quite so much.
A little different.
A little bit of, yeah. Why do you participate in art? Not just music, but in art in general. Why do you participate?
I'm not sure if I will know the answer to that question until the end of my journey. Because I feel like it's something that I've always engaged in, and I've taken one step in front of the other, and it's led me to a lot of really interesting places. And I don't know what really compelled that. Maybe it was life circumstance. Maybe it was just, I had an inclination for it as a child, and my parents allowed me to continue. But I think that's something that I hope to be able to kind of look back at the journey, to be able to kind of see what were the points along the way. So I'm not actually sure if that makes sense.
Okay. That's fair. Fair enough. Okay. One last question. Where can we see and or hear some of your art?
Okay, so if you want to check out my art, the best place is at my Bandcamp site, so Bandcamp/Kathryn Patricia. I also have some videos on YouTube as well, so if you wanted to subscribe at Kathryn Patricia Cobbler. And if you're on Instagram, I'm at Kathryn Patricia Violist there, and on Facebook, I'm at KP Violist.
KP Viol.
Yes.
And may I put these links in the...
Yes, you can
put the descriptors.
Yes, and if you're just interested about my journey and want to kind of experience more, you can check out my website at kathrynpatricia.com.
Fantastic, Kathryn. This has been exquisite. I love this kind of conversation. I love delving into philosophy and process and the heart and soul of the artist. So you've been a delight. Thank you for spending the afternoon with me. So I appreciate it to no end.
Oh, thank you. And likewise, this has been such a great conversation. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, my pleasure.
Thanks for hanging around and geeking out with us. If you enjoyed the show, hit the like and subscribe buttons. And more importantly, join the conversation and leave us a message or comment. We'd love to hear about your nerdy art. Thanks again, and join us next week for more Art Nerds.